So now we'll learn about memory and Alzheimer's. So memory is the process by which the brain encodes, stores and retrieves information. That is, memory has three components: the encoding of the information, storing of the information, and ultimately retrieving of the information when and where it is required. So it is essential for learning and decision making process, which are ultimately are required for the survival. There are various types of memories. First of all, on the basis of time, memory can be of two types: short-term and long-term memory. Short-term memory lasts for seconds to minutes and requires attention of the person, and hence it is also known as working memory. Working memory. For example, the digital subtraction test, in which we ask the person to subtract 7 from 100. Then after the result, that is 93, we ask him to again subtract 7. Then again, that's how we will check his attention and also his short-term memory. Also, what we can do is sequence of 5-digit test, in which we give him the 5 digits and ask him to repeat it. It is an example of OTP is an example of the short-term memory. The phone numbers repeating after looking from directory is also one of the examples. The long-term memory lasts for weeks to months, and it is not affected by the distraction. Okay, so it doesn't require the attention. Even if the attention is lost, the long-term memory will be intact. Now, based on awareness, the memory can be of again two types: explicit memory and implicit memory. In the explicit memory, it is the expressive memory, in which again it can be of two types: semantic and episodic. Semantic means spitting out facts. The learning of facts, like what is the capital of India? It is a fact that Delhi is the capital of India. So it comes under semantic memory. Semantic memory is stored in the prefrontal cortex and anterior temporal cortex. Okay. Now the episodic memory relates to the events. Events are some episodes in the person's life. Okay, for example, the birthday. Birthday is the episode. And birthday is not like when the birthday is coming, like 14th of August. This will be a fact, but for 14th of August in 2010, what did we do? This is an event, this was an episode. So that is an episodic memory, which is stored in the hippocampus, medial temporal lobe, and the neocortex. Now the implicit memory. Implicit memory is present in the subconscious, which we call it subconscious. It can be a procedure. Like some procedure that we do, it can be that which is stored in the basal ganglia, motor cortex, or the cerebellum. Then it can be of priming, which is stored in the neocortex, and the conditioning, which is stored in the amygdala. Then we come to the synaptic plasticity. What do we mean by that? It is the ability of the synapses to strengthen or weaken over time based on activity of synapses. That is, if those synapses are being used continuously, they will strengthen, and if they are not used for a long time, they will weaken. We try to remember something for example, what we studied yesterday. Let's say we studied the TCA cycle yesterday. So now, if we do not revise it, the synapses formed regarding the TCA cycle will weaken over time, and it will be lost, and it when we study it again, it will be very much new to us. But if we study the TCA cycle again and again for a couple of days, it will strengthen the synapses created in our brain regarding the TCA cycle, and we won't forget it very fast. Okay. Now, synaptic plasticity can again be of two types: potentiation and depression. Potentiation means the strengthening, and depression means the weakening of the synapses. Potentiation can be post-tetanic potentiation, long-term potentiation, and sensitization. And depression can be long-term depression and habituation. In long-term depression, it occurs in the cerebellum and it is beneficial in depressing the faulty synapses. Okay, the synapses which are not required or which have certain problems which our brain doesn't want us to remember, it depresses it. That is depression. And the long-term potentiation is the conversion of the short-term memory into the long-term memory. It occurs in the hippocampus and it is also known as consolidation. Now, what is the Hebb's rule? Hebb's rule is the repeated activation of the hippocampal synapses that leads to synaptic strengthening. Like as I gave you the example of the TCA cycle. If we'll repeat the synapses again and again, it will lead to the synaptic strengthening. It is also known as Hebb's rule. Okay, it is also known as Hebb's rule. Now, this is a presynaptic neuron and this is a postsynaptic neuron. In the presynaptic neuron, the synaptic vesicles contain the glutamate and the nitric oxide, which act on the NMDA receptor, which is initially blocked by the magnesium. Okay, but now as these neurotransmitters bind to the receptor, they causes depolarization and remove the magnesium from the NMDA. And then the NMDA is able to do its function, which is the synaptic strengthening by protein formation. Okay, so NMDA has a role in synaptic strengthening with the help of two transmitters, glutamate and nitric oxide. Now, what is the applied aspect of it? If there is a lesion in the hippocampus, there will be inability to form the new long-term memory, that is anterograde amnesia. We won't be able to form new memories, but the past memories will be intact. If the past memories are lost, this is called as retrograde amnesia. Retrograde means past and anterograde is future. That is, there is anterograde amnesia means there will be problem in forming the memories in the future. That is the new memories. But if there is a lesion in the hippocampus, the recent and short-term memories will be intact, and all the tests of the short-term memory will be present. Okay. So now, what are the functions of certain other areas with respect to the memory? So the mammillary bodies, it has a function in a recollective memory, that when we try to remember something things, the role of mammillary bodies come. And if there is degeneration of the mammillary bodies, we get the Wernicke's and Korsakoff psychosis. Okay, which is alcoholism is a risk factor for which. Now the thalamus, and particularly the interior nucleus of thalamus, it has a role in recent memory. Then basal forebrain, that is nucleus basalis of Maynard. It has a role in acetylcholine secretion, which has a role in Alzheimer's disease. Okay, now amygdala. Amygdala is associated with the memory, with emotions, and entorhinal cortex associates memory with smell. So amygdala with emotions and entorhinal cortex with smell. Okay, then corpus callosum has a role in hemispheric transfer of memory, that from one hemisphere to the another hemisphere, as the corpus callosum connects the two hemispheres. Okay, so again, what were the functions of all the areas? Mammillary body has a role in recollective memory, then thalamus in the recent memory, nucleus basalis of Maynard acetylcholine secretion, which has a role in Alzheimer's disease, and amygdala, which associates memory with emotions, entorhinal cortex with smell, and corpus callosum in the hemispheric transfer of the memory from one hemisphere to the another. Then, if we study about the Alzheimer's disease, what we can learn is that it is the most common cause of dementia, that is loss of memory. which occurs usually in the people aged more than 85 years of age, who have 40% chance of getting Alzheimer's. Now, what is the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's? It is the accumulation of the A beta amyloid in the neurons and outside the neurons. And how are A beta amyloids produced? Normally, there is a protein called amyloid precursor protein, which is normally metabolized by the alpha secretase. But when in the abnormality, instead of being metabolized by the alpha secretase, the amyloid precursor protein is metabolized by the beta secretase. And the metabolism by the beta secretase produces A beta amyloid, which gets accumulated. The A beta accumulation causes the hyperphosphorylated tau proteins. Okay, hyperphosphorylated means many phosphorus moieties are attached to the tau proteins, which can accumulate inside the neuron or outside the neuron. If they are accumulated inside the neuron, then this will produce neurofibrillary tangles, which will cause progressive neuronal degradation. With time, this neuron in which the tau proteins have been accumulated, they will degenerate. And if they are accumulated outside the neuron, then this will produce amyloid plaque, and which will produce the toxic response from other cells like oligodendrocytes, microglia, and astrocytes. Okay. Then another factor is the diabetes. In the diabetes, the patient has increased chances of getting Alzheimer's. How? The normally insulin degrading enzyme degrades both insulin and the A beta amyloid. But in the diabetes, what happens is there is an increase in the insulin. So all the insulin degrading enzyme is used up in degrading the insulin, and no enzyme is left for the degradation of A beta amyloid. So it will increase in amount, which will get accumulated. So diabetes, the people having diabetes have an increased chance of getting Alzheimer's disease. So now, what are all investigations we will do for the Alzheimer's patient? First of all, we will do the MRI of the temporal lobe, particularly the median and the lateral of the cingulate gyrus, entorhinal cortex, in which we'll see that these all are atrophied. Okay. And then the histopathological examination, in that we will look for the neurofibrillary tangles inside the neurons and the Hirano bodies. Then EEG of the brain will be normal. PET scan is the investigation of choice. Okay, PET scan is the investigation of choice, which will detect the hypermetabolism of the hypermetabolism and amyloids, which will detect the hypometabolism. Sorry. Not hypometabolism and the amyloid. Then we will go for the CSF analysis, in which we will see the decreased A beta but increased hyperphosphorylated taus. Then what are the risk factor of Alzheimer's? The most important risk factor is the age. If the patient is aged, he has a increased chance of getting Alzheimer's. Then the positive family history. If the Alzheimer's runs in the family, then there is an increased chance. In females, usually there is an increased chance. If there is a history of smoking, if there is any history of head trauma, if there is history of stroke, then metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and hypertension. Low IQ is not a risk factor. Okay, so keep this in mind. Low IQ is not a risk factor. Then what are the clinical stages of the Alzheimer's? Stage 1 is in which the hippocampus is involved, so there is a difficulty in long-term memory formation. Then the angular gyrus is involved, in which the person has anomia, that is, there will be difficulty in naming the objects. Okay, naming the objects, people, despite knowing what and who they are. The person knows that this is this person, this is that object, but he won't be able to name it. Okay, then stage 3 In stage 3, association areas and superior parietal lobe are involved, in which the person will have visuospatial disorientation and apraxia. What do we mean by these? In the visuospatial disorientation, we can understand from the example of parking a car. Okay, so person won't be able to park the car because his orientation won't be very good of the space around him and the things which he is seeing. The orientation won't be very good, so he won't be able to park the car. Okay. And what do we mean by the apraxia? Apraxia is an inability of the person to apply the learned motor skills. Okay, the skills which he has already learned, he won't be able to do them. That is apraxia. Then stage 4 involves the prefrontal cortex, in which there will be behavioral and personality changes. Behavioral and personality changes. What is the treatment for the Alzheimer's disease? We give the patient cholinesterase inhibitors to increase the amount of acetylcholine in the nucleus basalis of Maynard. We saw na, in the nucleus basalis of Maynard, there is the deficiency of the acetylcholine in the Alzheimer's disease. So, we give the cholinesterase inhibitors to increase the amount of acetylcholine. For example, donepezil and rivastigmine. Second, we give the NMDA antagonist like memantine, and then we can give the monoclonal antibody agonist of A beta, that is aducanumab. Okay, this is the treatment of the Alzheimer's. So this is all about the dementia and the Alzheimer's.